Thank you very much for joining. Welcome, everybody. I see a lot of new faces as well, so great to have you all on board here for another online talk, Geneva Macro Labs online talk. Tonight, we'll be talking about the jobs of the future, managing work in the digital age. Before we start, just some housekeeping rules as usual. You might have seen on the screen we are recording this webinar, so you can turn off your camera if you don't want to be recorded. And once the webinar is over, we publish our recording on YouTube, so you can actually re-listen to some of the discussions we had, or post your comments, chat with our expert, etc. The address will be posted in the chat box after during the webinar. And then last but not least, I would like to ask you to mute yourself now, so that we have best experience from our speakers when you're not speaking. And as we open the Q&A later on, you will be able to unmute yourself and ask your questions during the Q&A. Let me introduce quickly the two moderators. So I'm Eckhard Ernst. I'm president of Geneva Macro Labs and will be chairing this webinar. And I'm joined here by Tessa van Hulsen, who is an expert on HR. Is actually a practitioner on HR, if you want. She studied business administration. And the interesting story between Tessa and myself is that we studied in the same university, but probably a year or two apart. We never met until very recently. So after 5 years in strategy consulting, she joined a British mid-cap private equity firm, and then went to head the staff of the UniCredit Bank at the executive board for 7 years. And most recently, and that's when I got to know Tessa, was she joined Deutsche Börse, the German stock exchange, as head of HR strategy. So we're very pleased to have Tessa with us as our moderator for the Q&A session, and she will give us also some of her insights into the world of work. Just to give you a background, if you can go to the next slide, please. This webinar is basically part of a series that we want to organize on the basis of a book that was co-edited together with Stefan Güldenberg and Klaus North. Stefan is a management professor at the University of Liechtenstein, and Klaus is a professor at the Wiesbaden Business School. And so this book actually came just out, I think, a month ago or so. So we are very pleased to have the chance to present some of the content to this audience here tonight. What we will focus in this one webinar is on the first two parts of the book. So the two speakers that we have tonight will talk on life in 2030 and work in 2030, and then probably in June we have another webinar on leadership in 2030, and then after the summer break a discussion on careers in 2030. And the particularity of this book, and I want to stress this because this is actually the idea that Stefan and Klaus had, is that the book is written as if we are already in 2030 and looking back of what has happened over the last decade. So it makes a bit of a backward-looking perspective on the future of work, which is really a unique and innovative focus of this entire exercise. So obviously you get a gist of it already tonight, but we invite all of you to check out the book if you have a chance and interested in this. Let me start introducing our two speakers tonight. First, no, you have to go back to the speakers. Yes, exactly. So first in line is Sabina Dewan. Sabina is a good friend of Geneva Macro Labs, I should say. She is also part of our advisory board and is founder and executive director of the Just Jobs Network based in India. At the same time, she's senior visiting fellow at the Center for Policy Research in India as well, and a non-resident fellow at the Kasi School of Public Policy. Sabina is actually has shared experience with me at the International Labour Organization. She's a very well-known scholar in labor issues, and so we're very pleased to have her giving us a bit more of a perspective of what's going on in the labor markets outside, let's say, OECD and advanced economies. And our second speaker is Daniel Samaan. Daniel is an economist and senior researcher at the International Labour Organization in Geneva. He's an expert in the analysis of global labor market trends and specialized in globalization issues, labor market issues related to new technologies, artificial intelligence, sustainability development, and the new world culture. And so he has been authoring a number of studies, both policy studies at the ILO, but also academic work that is well read and well known outside his the international sphere of the ILO. So with that introduction, let me go and to open the discussion to our two speakers. The way we organize this is we have two main questions that we want to share with our speakers. One is, and so we start with that question first, and then we open up to the discussion to all of you, where basically Tessa will give you some feedback. So the first question I have, and I wanted to start with Daniel actually on this, is what do you see as the key challenges for labor markets? Can you give us your insight into this and the insights that you have shared in the book?
Yeah, thank you very much, Eckhard, for this nice introduction and for this question. Maybe let me make a few more remarks about the chapter, what it is about, and what the scope of the chapter is. Eckhard already said that it's a vision about how 2030 could look. So the idea is to think through different scenarios about labor markets in 2030. So if you read, or when you read the chapter, you shouldn't see the circumstances that I describe as a prediction of the future, but as a possible future based on megatrends that we can see today. So I play around with these different megatrends that we can see today, and I'm trying to understand what that could mean for labor markets in the long term. The interesting part, I think, is not to take a megatrend, like a megatrend could be climate change or demographic shifts, and I'll go into some of those in a minute. So I think the interesting part is not to take those megatrends and to linearly extrapolate them into the future, but to think a little bit about how different megatrends can interact and what that could mean for labor markets. So let me give you an example, which brings me also back to Eckhard's question. If you take Europe, we know that we will see massive demographic shifts. So we have aging societies. In 2030, the average worker will have an age of 47. So he'll be already beyond what we call his or her prime age. Productivity is probably going to fall. Participation rates are going to be lower. So altogether, we may see a decline in labor supply. We may have less labor available, and that's a little bit the story of the war for talent, and we will have skills shortages and so on. Another mega trend is, of course, digitization, which is the precondition for the use of digital tools, artificial intelligence, and for a lot of the automation potential that we can see or that a lot of people talk about. So here you get a completely different story, the story of job losses and maybe a big decline in the labor demand. So we may have labor supply declining, labor demand declining. So from an economist's point of view, you actually don't know in the end if we will have more jobs or fewer. And so what about 2030? Well, it depends on how do these trends interact and what do we do about that. So I cannot go through all trends and all regions, so maybe let me stick to Europe. So I already mentioned the demographic shift. I already mentioned digitization as a second one. So there are a couple of others or other mega trends that I can see for Europe or for advanced economies. I think to some extent it's also true for the United States. So there's, of course, COVID-19. I wouldn't call it a mega trend, but rather a shock. If you have a look at the chapter, I did look at COVID-19, but I have to say I underestimated the permanence of the crisis. But I still think, and I mentioned that in the chapter, that I think we will get the bill presented of all the collateral damage in a couple of months. And I think we will, after a surge in the economic activity, I think we will see some issues on the labor market, especially in Europe. Another one is geopolitical shifts. I think in 2030, we will have a completely different geopolitical situation. We have the United States, we have China, maybe with Russia as a junior partner. We will have a couple of medium-sized powers, India, the European Union. Powers can be military or also economically or politically. And this will have implications for globalization and supply chains. I mean, think about, for example, finding common standards for technology, finding common social standards. I think this will be much more difficult in 2030. We may have two internets, maybe, who knows? So geopolitical shifts, and of course we have environmental degradation. That's another one. I would take it a bit broader than climate change. I mean, there's the destruction of our oceans, there's waste. So this is another big mega trend. And here I think we will see more of a shift towards adaptation rather than at the moment, the big focus is on climate change mitigation. And the fourth trend that I think is relevant and presents a key challenge for European or advanced economy labor markets is the reformation, let's say, or a potential breakdown of the European Union. I mean, I don't know if I would call it a mega trend, already a policy response, but I think the EU needs to change. It needs to become more of a federal union. And if it doesn't do that, there is a serious risk that it will partly break into pieces. And all of this will have implications for labor markets. Maybe at this stage, let me just kind of list what I see. So there's first, we will see, I think, a dissolution of the workspace, which we can already see at the moment. Physical, we already have that partly. Also in time. So this idea of a physical workspace is really fading away. I think we will have much more decentralization of information and decision making. I think this will have consequences also for hierarchies. I think hierarchical organizations we will have much fewer of those and less hierarchical decision making. We will have a much more heterogeneous workforce in terms of age, in terms of gender, in terms of other factors. So you will have work teams which are much more diverse than today, some of which will work part-time, other will work full-time, they will be in different time spaces. So you will have a much more complex team structure. I think there will be a big trend towards a small, decentralized manufacturing with less standardization and service. I think we will get completely away of the industrialized idea of factories and amassing people in the same place. And all of this in the end leads to more complex work process, I would say. Oh, sorry, I forgot also in this context, I think there will be a shift away from labor productivity more to resource productivity. I think most of the processes will be very much focused on how can we do things with the smallest use of resources possible and the smallest use of waste. So at the minimum, what we will see on the labor market is, I think, a complete reorganization of work processes, where we have to rethink what will people do and what will machines do. So I would say a big reorganization. And possibly even we can see, I mean, now I'm a little bit really thinking about a vision for 2030. I think we can also see a complete end of what I would call the job system. The idea that we organize our work by standardizing tasks in occupations and taking these occupations and selling them as jobs on the labor market, for which people try to compete and organizations try to offer these jobs. It's something that I call, work without jobs. Maybe I stop here. So those are the challenges and the implications, the main implications that I can see for 2030.
Excellent. Thank you, Daniel. So over to you, Sabina. Do you see the same challenges when you look at it from a more global perspective, or do you see something completely different?
Thank you, Eckhard. So no, I think that the challenges that Daniel outlines are very much, very much capture the sort of picture that we're looking at globally. What I'd like to do here is to talk a little bit about how some of these trends actually play out in the Global South, and to draw from actually our chapter, Eckhard, but also from Daniel's chapter in some ways, to kind of to see where we end up now and what needs to be done. So I think the first thing kind of on a 10,000 foot level that our chapter acknowledges is the fact that we are at this juncture right now at a point where we've departed from economics and politics that is human-centered, that our systems, whether we're talking about governance systems, whether we're talking about institutions, whether we're talking about combating climate change, or we're talking about fostering, businesses, we are at a juncture where these kinds of phenomenon are in an end to themselves, as opposed to having at the center human and individual welfare, or even societal welfare. I think so with that as kind of an overarching understanding that there needs to be a fundamental shift in the paradigm that has departed from having the well-being of individuals at the center to just fostering economic growth for the sake of economic growth, or fostering power and consolidation of power in the hands of a few for the sake of profits. There needs to be a shift in paradigm that once again puts individual societies back at the center. Now, in terms of the trends that Daniel has referred to, and I'll go just a little bit deeper into them, I think as our chapter indicates, Eckhard, if we were ever on a path to convergence between the global north and the global south, I think the pandemic has really shattered those hopes. I think the pandemic made sure that what were already stretched fiscal budgets in the global south are now stretched even thinner, with less available to invest in building resilience and reinforcing development through investments in preventative, and as opposed to just emergency and curative health, for example, investments in human capital like education and skills, and other forms of social security, so pensions, disability, maternity, and there's less to invest in infrastructure and in an ecosystem that fosters business. I think all of these sort of stretched fiscal budgets and the ensuing inability to make the investments necessary in laying a foundation for sustainable development, I think has implications for labor markets in the global south that have a massive demographic bulge, which the chapter talks about. I don't even use the word demographic dividend anymore. And the countries in the global south that are facing this demographic bulge are unable to provide for their already large and growing populations. At the same time where globalization in some ways and access to more information and media has reinforced the aspirations of young people. So there's a complete mismatch in terms of what is available and the economies are able to provide at the same time that the expectations and aspirations have grown. And without these investments, neither the supply side, workers and their capacities, nor the demand side, which is the business ecosystem that I talked about, can thrive. So that's one, is just the if there was any talk of convergence before, now that doesn't exist. Fiscal budgets are stretched even thin, which prevents the investments in necessary foundations for development and healthy labor markets. The second point I want to just draw out, which both Daniel's chapter as well as our chapter really talks about, is problems with our existing institutional and governance structures. So here there's two key points that I want to underscore. First is that political expedience, as opposed to economic or even societal welfare, has been dictating governance and policy choices for some time now. So that's number one, in terms of a failure of institutional and governance structures, that political expedience is what's driving choices as opposed to well-being. And the second is that as the world changes because of these major transformations that Daniel was also just talking about, so technology, migration, climate change, urbanization, restructuring of trade into value chains that now are becoming less or more integrated, which is a separate discussion. But all of these transformations are upending the way that we live and work so quickly at an unprecedented scale and speed that is much faster and much bigger than the ability of institutions to adjust. So this leads to kind of a great deal of mistrust in institutions, in governance institutions, which then I think reinforces a whole host of negative trends, such as growing informality, but not just informality, which is what the first thing that we associate with the Global South. Of course, informal employment constitutes a major share of employment in almost every country in the Global South. But the other trend, which is largely propelled by technology, is also growing precarity of work in the formal sector. I have a few more things that I wanted to share, but in the interest of time, I'll pause there and then we'll come back during the question and answer session.
Great, thank you very much, Sabina. I mean, I guess that the mistrust that you just referred to is, I think, is indeed a concern not only for the Global South. I hand it over to Tessa to give us her reflection on what she just heard and open the Q&A.
Thank you, Ernst. Okay, so thank you, Sabina and Daniel. Maybe I wanted to share some thoughts which came to my mind while I was reading both of your chapters, and I read them twice because the first time you basically get these new ideas and then you have to start working on them. I think one of the big questions I'm really asking myself, and that probably relates very much to you, Sabina, is how do we manage to transport these trends which you see on the political and Daniel on the geopolitical scale into the economy, actually. Because even if politics would start thinking about new systems in terms of social welfare or shared welfare, it still doesn't mean that economy will actually take this on. Now, if I look at the overall arching theme, which is labor, sharing my experience from HR has, in my view, always been pretty slow with picking up trends, but rather focused on matters at hand. That is at least the experience I've had for the past 25 years in my business career. So HR has always been a shop where you have many, many busy people doing a lot of, let's say, administrative work and not really having the time, because it always used to be a cost center, to focus on strategic developments or pick up on these. What one could say for the past probably 24 to 36 months, apart from the fact that COVID came as a huge shock to all HR and departments, I think, across the world. I was in many, many calls last year, weekly calls throughout the whole, basically, of the world, because headhunters were putting us together. So what's happened? COVID turned up and suddenly HR realized, oh my God, everything we've been trying to not think about because we're so busy with admin stuff is now hitting us really hard. It's things like digitization. It's things like, do we need signatures, yes or no? It's where do people work? It's how do I lead people? How do I lead a team which is not on the ground? How important is a team actually for people? You know, we had many people saying, I'm super happy because I don't have to commute anymore. Others were deep in solitude and didn't really like the concept of home office. We also had questions like from managers, how can I keep up efficiency? So it was a big issue and big issues turning up. And suddenly HR was faced with a number of trends which were just being simply reinforced by COVID. Another trend which I see, and I think both of our authors have picked up on this, is the new generation. They are different. I'm from the 70s, so if I talk about they, it's probably someone who was born after 2000. We experience these people to have a much better understanding of a work-life balance, and they are actually really looking for a work-life balance. We also see that in Goldman Sachs juniors now writing huge articles in social media, and Goldman Sachs needing to pick up on this, something which would have been unthinkable even 10 years ago, 5 years ago, now is normal. UBS had a huge shitstorm in social media because someone was making fun of how much people have to work at UBS. So we see this trend that the new generation, I'm very excited about these young people, basically say that they also want to make a difference, but they also want to have a life, which I think is super important because it kicks into what Sabina says. What is really important? Is it me as an individual, or do I also have more spare time to look after social projects, which many of these young people do? The other thing which I see as trend is the demographics Daniel was alluding to. Senior staff obviously are now looking into or are on the verge of being, getting out of the job market. And I think the big issue for HR, but also for society, is to say, how can we keep these people motivated? How can we have a proper shift between the experience which we have built up for ages and the more junior people who are much more forceful, obviously, and are driving innovations forward? We haven't really found a good answer, because you sometimes see that people who are on the verge of getting out of business are just not interested in new developments anymore, and they are sort of stuck in their thoughts. Young people become frustrated and are not really interested, so we actually lose a lot of momentum and capacity in this. So I think one of my biggest question after reading the books and knowing that most of these things, the trends you were picking up on, are really trends we need to look at, is really how do we manage to transport these thoughts into business, and how do we manage to get some awareness for them? Because I sometimes feel that we have many intelligent people actually having fantastic thoughts, and it sort of gets stuck in, I don't know where, somewhere where no one really looks at it. And then we have economics and societies which are overwhelmed by trends. So I think that would be from my side. We could start with the questions. We're actually getting loads of questions, and I think I would probably start from the beginning. Daniel, I think that question was for you, whether climate change would impact immigration and labor in Europe. What's your view on that?
Yeah, I can be very brief on that. I think it will. I mean, if you read the chapter, you can see that I'm a little bit more skeptical about this greening and so on that we are doing, especially in the European Union on mitigation. And I think by 2030, at least, the impacts for the EU will be relatively small. I think the bigger impact for the EU will be indirect, exactly through something like that. I think, in North Africa and other regions, not sure how bad it'll be by 2030, but for sure 2040, 2050, there will be a big immigration pressure on the EU, which if the EU is smart, thinking about the demographic shifts, could be also used for its advantage.
Okay, thank you. So then we had a question from Günther to everybody. Günther, maybe if you want to pose your question directly.
Well, my question would be, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, my question would be, considering that organizations are becoming increasingly liquid in terms of less planned, but more, let's say, in an ad hoc mode, my question would be if the classical model, employer and employee, will not fade away and will be replaced maybe by a different culture, a different working culture where individuals play a more important role on self-definition.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that if you want. I mean, this is exactly what I meant by when I said the end of the job system. I mean, this is what I meant by the job system, this classical employer-employee relationship, together with this workplace 9 to 5 and so on. And there are, I mean, I don't know if you know Bergman's book on New Work, New Culture. I think this goes in the same direction, and I'm very excited about this. I think there will be more project-based work, more from individuals that collaborate in different situations for different things. And that's why I'm not sure that people will still be stuck to the same organization for a long time period. And what, of course, is completely open, if this happens, our institutions are not prepared for that. Our institutions are all set up about this idea of a job, of an employer, of an employee, taxation, unemployment, all of it is around this idea of the jobs. And I think we don't have a structure for this, what you call self-defined individuals, because I think many people do not want to be stuck with the same employer forever. They want to do social things. They want to do more environmental things that are good for the environment and so on. And I absolutely agree with what you're saying, but I cannot tell you exactly how the structure would look like. I think this is one of the possibilities that we need to move into something very different.
Well, I'd like to weigh in on that as well, Tessa, if I may.
Yeah, sure.
So I think I think I'm a lot less excited about this shift than Daniel is. Not so much in terms of my own personal experience. I love having the flexibility that I do, but I'm also very, very cognizant of the fact that I'm one of the very few privileged people in the Global South who has the luxury of a laptop and being able to work from home, who has the luxury of having multiple jobs so that I can make ends meet and live, live to the standards that I want to live with. The reality in the Global South is that a large share of the population actually doesn't have the kind of luxury of flexible work. And under the guise of flexible work, we actually have more and more people that are having to stretch themselves even more and more to be able to earn a subsistence just to be able to survive. So I think that's one point that, in the Global South, what we are calling gig work, flexible work, has a very, very different meaning when it comes to what it actually does for people that don't have the means of a secure social security system, that don't have the, that don't have the luxury of savings. And so, I think that's really important to point out in terms of the reality of the Global South. Equally troubling, and I think this is also true for the Global North and the Global South, but is this idea of self-defined individuals, right? If we take the gig economy as an example, we're providing structures that provide consumers with a great deal of convenience. And yes, we're setting up these technology intermediaries and creating a very dynamic business environment. But at the same time, we are creating a cadre of workers that are completely unprotected. And again, the idea of being self-defined. Not all entrepreneurship is created equal. A lot of entrepreneurship is subsistence entrepreneurship, where people actually, given the choice, would rather not take the risk. They would love to have a 9-to-5 job. And in a country like India, and many in the global South, the applications for public sector jobs are through the roof, precisely because people would love to have the kind of 9-to-5 job that provides them with security, as opposed to the insecurity that comes in the absence of public institutions that can provide more secure livelihoods. So I'll just stop there. But I think in this aspect, Daniel's chapter and our chapter and this conversation really presents the reality of a dual global landscape that we live in, right? Where there is this kind of increasing divergence between the South and the North.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. In the interest of time, we're getting super cool questions. Thank you so much. Maybe I hand over one to Eckhard. We keep them for maybe the next round. We've got a question from Prakash. Maybe Prakash, if you want to pose it, or I can do that and hand over to Eckhard with that. If you can unmute yourself.
It's a very simple question, but I'm happy to say hello to dear friends. So my question was more about how global institutions should prepare themselves for some of the challenges that you've described. So in your ideal view, what should the ILO look like in 2030? And if you want to talk about how my own institution, the IMF, should look like in 2030, whether it should even exist, that's fine too.
Yeah, no, thanks, Prakash. Great question, and I guess Sabina would have to say something as well. I mean, I give you the floor, Sabina, after the next question, so then you can say something about it. No, but so in the book we have one of our colleagues, Eric Ravel, who unfortunately could not join tonight. He has discussed a bit also the outlook for the ILO, and also kind of report a bit back here on this, on what he said. I mean, the problem really is, in a sense, that what international institutions, and I think the ILO in a sense is a front runner for that because it has been around for so long, realize that we are reaching a point where the hard laws, the hard recommendation that the ILO has put forward, or that other institutions have put forward, are reaching in a sense, a decreasing return to scale. So the more we put forward, the less they're actually implemented. And you can see that if you look at ratification numbers for ILO convention and recommendations. We have the 4 core principles, but then as we put out more and more of these recommendations and conventions, they get less and less ratified and less implemented in countries. So I think that there needs to be a complement, at least, that these international agencies need to put forward in terms of, for instance, soft law, in terms of technical assistance. And a lot of countries, and I mean, India is certainly not one of them, but a lot of countries actually would benefit enormously from technical assistance and continuous interaction with people on the ground. Now, unfortunately, our institutions are too small to do that on a global scale. We are 3,000 people at the ILO, and that's not enough to kind of really provide detailed technical assistance. But that would be one of my personal recommendations for such an institution, to really kind of provide technical assistance, so that not only do we have the recommendation on what they should do, what we actually trying to implement it, and maybe feed back the experience that we get from some countries to make it beneficial for everybody else. That's my take on how I think the future of work should look like from the point of view of international agencies. But I wanted to move on to the next question, and because it is exactly kind of pointing to that, which is what could and should policymakers, businesses, employees, and social partners do? So the question is relatively broad, and I invite our 2 speakers basically to kind of pick the type of perspective that I want to use. And I start with Sabina maybe on that question. Thank you.
Thank you, Eckhard. And actually, in this context, I won't take a lot of time, because I really want to drive home one particular message, which is where I started in the first question, which is we really are at a juncture where we need a fundamental shift in the paradigm in the way that we do economics and politics. And this entails looking at versions of capitalism where people have more ownership and can claim their fair share of the economic pie, right? So again, where people have more ownership and can claim their fair share of a growing economic pie. And we're sort of slowly, and our chapter talks about this, slowly starting to move in that direction, right? That's where, I mean, that's why blockchain has all of a sudden become, it took me a long time to understand what blockchain is, but now I think I get it. And it actually is moving toward this kind of a thinking of an open ledger and having greater transparency where, you know, where people can claim their fair share. Where there's all of these discussions about having the ability for consumers to own and monetize their own data, right? So it's not about, you know, big cell phone companies or big technology companies that then take this data and they use the big data and accrue all the gains from it. But that actually you know, how do I own my own cell phone data and decide and monetize what I do with it? There's at least, if not measures that are realizing these goals, there's a discussion around it. It's when we think about rethinking cooperatives, when we think about restructuring economic models such that, you know, and rethinking capitalism in a way that people have greater ownership, that they are at the center of this economic and politics, the ends of economics and politics. And I think that the shift toward this is being driven very much by the mistrust in governance institutions, as well as greater asymmetries of power with consolidation in the private sector, and the realization that these trends are actually in a way undermining the very governance and business environment that workers also need. So what we need is a fundamental shift in this paradigm. I think we're starting to see the green shoots of it. And I think that there's more to be done to advocate and propel those shoots even further. I'll pause there. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Sabina. And we can just fingers crossed that this is actually going to happen, as you suggest. Daniel, over to you.
Yeah, so I'll also try to be brief. I think if the future looks more or less like the past, which seems to be the assumption of many, so if it's just an extension of the industrial society as we know it, you know, most of the labor market institutions that we know today are actually coming from the experience of the Industrial Revolution. Labor markets, labor ministries, unions, social security, all of this is coming from the Industrial Revolution. So if the future stays in this framework, okay, you know, one sector declines, another increases, some jobs loss are here, a bit reskilling there and here, I think then our institutions are great. We have very good education systems, we have public employment. I mean, of course, there will be some turbulences and we need to adjust that, and we do need to change education systems a little bit and so on. But we have, in a sense, we have, you know, the tools are in principle there. If, however, we are getting away from this idea of jobs and then, you know, doing your education to get a job and a job to earn a living, and it's the corporations that are bundling the jobs for you, and then you go there from 9 to 5 and so on. I think then we are, you know, we don't have much in place. And that is the reason why, Sabina, I think you said, you know, this can go in a very bad direction. People want security. You know, I think you can have these self-defined individuals. I think you can have this project-based work also in an environment with security, but we don't have the institutions for that. I think the problems that you are describing are coming from what is, in my opinion, a way too strong corporate sector. You know, somebody posted a question on shareholder value. And this is, for me, the job systems, the corporations, organizations that are at the moment at the center of organizing the way we work. And the people who want to go into the public sector, ask them, what are they actually doing all day? Do they think they are doing useful things? Do they think that there are things that they want to do in their lives? I mean, I know many people in the public sector and in other sectors that don't think that they are doing that. So I think there are probably other ways to organize our societies, especially with the new digital tools like blockchains, like you said, and like many others, with more decentralized decision-making, more sharing of information, which will immediately lead also to more power for people who have less power right now. And on the ILO, I just cannot, I have to make that remark. I hope it's not high treason, because I'm of course still at the ILO. I mean, the ILO is a classical institution out of the coming out of the Industrial Revolution. So also I think the values that the ILO stands for are more important than ever. I think, 99% of working class people are in agreement with the values that the ILO stands for and says we need more of that. But in terms of the institutional framework and the intervention, I think the organization is still very much acting as if we are in the 1950s or 1970s.
That's okay. So I'm just getting the info from, thank you, Daniel, from Eckhart, that we have 10 minutes left and the questions are coming in. I would like to ask, and I just need to check, there's a very interesting question which came up, which I think, Daniel, would also be for you, but probably for both of you, and seen from both perspectives. Sandra, your question about education and the work available in 2030. Would you mind asking that? Thank you.
I mean, I have spent a whole lot of time talking to business owners and corporations about how they see work 2030 and what that actually means for education. And we've been talking about trends, we've been talking about the technology, and we already know that we don't have enough trained people to basically manage the technology we have now. So we are right now in the middle of the digitalization age, but there's not enough people to actually manage these clouds. Especially nowadays, people have multiple clouds. It's just, a lot of work. It's going to be even more, and there is no education for that. Not fast enough. Let's put it that way. So I would like to ask, how do they see this going forward? I know I've been reading a lot about custom-made education, smaller bits and pieces of education, tailor-made for people to actually, just go and do a specific job. And I was wondering, how do you guys think this will evolve over the next 10 years?
Daniel, maybe if you could give a view on a more global perspective, and since Sabina, I think I would be really interested in getting your view from what we believe will be countries with a growing population, which would also be people who could work in Europe and USA, where we see a decline in population, maybe.
One thing I would like to add, Tessa, one thing I would like to add is that what we see now is that, the global population growth will definitely increase the whole educational market. But there's also a thing which is called continuous education. So several countries, specifically in the Nordics and in Europe, we see that huge percentages of the workers already study continuously from the age of 25 to the age of 60. I mean, I think in Sweden it's already 64%. So it's something else, it's continuously being updated. And how do you guys see that?
Yeah, so I have to say that I'm not an education specialist. What I think is that I'm a little bit skeptical whether also the classical education that we know right now with universities, I mean, the whole model in the US universities with the tuition and payment and so on, I mean, it's also in a sense a hierarchical organization where you need to get in, and you need to do that. You become a lawyer. Then there's another hurdle. You need to get into the profession, and then you're allowed to be in the job of a lawyer, and then you work off your student debt and so on. So I mean, you can basically get everything you need on the internet at the moment, right? So I don't see that this system is coming that this will continue in the future. I mean, I would think as a person, I would think it's probably good that as many people as possible get a very broad basic education, and I think there are possibilities through digital tools to allow that. I mean, you can watch very nice lectures of people I would have never been able to meet directly on YouTube, and you can do that on a lower basis as well. And then in this new world, maybe you need less of certification and less of, you know, these certifications are also just a way to channel information in a certain way, right? So maybe you don't need that. I'm not an education expert. I don't know if we can have that then without the certification and more on an ad hoc basis. But that's my feeling about education systems, that there will be big changes.
Yeah, you're right. AI is going to be involved there. So you will actually have tailor-made education for yourselves for a specific thing that you want to do, and get continuous feedback on how you improve.
And the tools, we are always afraid of them taking away our jobs, but they can do fantastic things. I mean, I can already now do things with a computer I wouldn't be able to do 10 years ago. So there will be more and more applications, not only on the computer, but also with machines, I think, where people with simple education will be able to do more complex things in these more decentralized and smaller manufacturing shops, if you want. That's what I think.
Yeah, so my second part of the question was, in this this whole era of digitalization and these big changes that we see now, how do you see that businesses need to reimagine their services and their products? Because obviously by 2030 it's going to be a complete new platform, stage, event, requirements.
I mean,
You know,
maybe,
you want to take that and maybe answer the rest?
yeah, well, Sandro, sorry, what I would like to do is just to get also Sabina's view, because in the book you will see that there's also the discussion about where does workforce come from, and the EU opening up in 10 years. And Sabina, I would really be interested in your view on education, given what you said before about access to computers, etc.
Yeah, thank you, Tessa. I mean, I think that I think we need to sort of divide up some of there's multiple questions kind of couched in the question that Sandra just posed. And I think the first is, do we think that technology is desirable in terms of a learning tool? And to that, I would respond with, I, compared to some of the other views that have just been expressed on this, am deeply skeptical of technology as a sole learning tool. I think that if the pandemic has done anything, it's reinforced how much we actually miss other people, right? Like, and the fact that children doing online classes is not working, and that there is value to actually having face-to-face and human interfaces to leveraging technology for learning. So technology is a fantastic tool for learning, absolutely, but it needs a human interface, particularly at stages of education. The second thing with regards to education that I think we really need to think about is there's a big divide between sort of the pure educationists that believe, and I apologize to some of the academics that might be in the audience, but that believe that learning for learning's sake is in and of itself of value, right? Education for education's sake. In fact, we're living in a world, and I fully agree with Daniel here, that, you know, that we're living in a world where employability matters, right? From a very early age, education, one of the goals of education must be preparing people for entry into the labor market. It's no longer enough to just get an education, but it's actually an education that is aligned with the demands of the labor market. And I think that that's a fundamental shift in terms of the kinds of curricula we need in schools, the quality of education we need, how we actually disseminate the education, to what you were saying, Sandra, which is, you know, the customized education, all of that, you know, needs to be thought through in terms of enhancing employability and not just learning for learning's sake. And the last thing is that especially in the global south, there's a big divide between education and skills. So you have, different socioeconomic groups. And Tessa, to your point, yes, the sort of more educated, formal sector, more educated, more socioeconomically advantaged children, youth might be able to, take up better paying jobs abroad, the traditional brain drain. But the reality of most of these nations is that these, most children don't actually have the means. Most youth don't have the means to migrate. And so how do you deal with this kind of divided reality, right? And what does education and skills and that continuum look like? In the global south, the reality is that many children drop out at very low levels of education, and skills training is a band-aid solution to try to get them to be productive members of the economy, even though they don't have an education. The German model is completely different because you do have requisite levels of education. In the global south, many children don't have requisite levels of education. So we actually need to rethink employability in education and reinforce the continuum between education and skills so that they work together for, differentially though, for those that are of better socioeconomic means and those that are of more.
Thank you, Sabina. So one last question. I know that we can't take them all. I'm really sorry because there are a number of really interesting questions. There was a question from Raphael on how both of you envision the future of welfare when work is increasingly informal and the workforce declines. Maybe if I give 30 seconds each for a very quick answer on the future of welfare and your view on it. Sabina, do you want to start?
Sure. Sure. 30 seconds is good for that because I think inevitably public provision of welfare is where it's at when we are talking about the loosening employer-employee kind of relationship, right? So when welfare becomes disassociated with employment, then the public sector needs to step in and actually provide a basic level of welfare. Of course, the elephant in the room is how do you pay for it? And I think here, I'm a favor of higher corporate taxes, as unpopular as that might be. I'm in favor of looking at innovative models of, contributory models where people that can afford it actually buy their own welfare, whereas you redistribute and provide welfare to those that can't. So we need to be innovative in terms of different kinds of financing, but increasingly, I think the important thing is that the public sector actually needs to be responsible for providing welfare and preferably universal welfare, but we can't jump and get there. It needs to be an iterative process.
Okay.
I think that's where it's at.
Thank you, Sabina. Daniel, over to you.
Yes, so I would agree with much what Sabina has said. I think it will, the welfare system has to move away from taxing labor in a corporate environment like this employer-employee relationship. And so the public, whether it's the government or whatever institution in society it is, has to take over. If you have some kind of work associations, there may have to be another way of contributing to financing this. But the general tendency, I would absolutely agree with what you said, Sabina, away from the labor tax.
So Eckhard, thank you, Daniel. Off to you for closing remarks.
Thank you very much, and thanks to both speakers. Thanks, Tessa, for excellent Q&A moderation, and sorry, my apologies for all the excellent questions that we couldn't take up. I would suggest to all of you, if you can continue the discussion on our YouTube or channel or on LinkedIn as soon as we as we post it, you will have the chance to also react to the discussion tonight and maybe add some of your own thoughts or pieces of work, as Raphael just shared in the chat, that you have done. On that note, I wanted to make an announcement that is really very much linked to what we discussed tonight. Is a conference that Daniel and Geneva Microlabs, together with some other partners in Switzerland, are organizing on the 3rd of June. It's on AI and talent management, the power of artificial intelligence. Can AI help create better jobs? We will have leading AI and HR experts with us on the 3rd of June at 4 p.m. Central European time. And you will have the possibility to also react with and discuss with our experts from companies, from HR talent management, and from AI companies to discuss the future of work and the future of talent management and human resource management. So I hope that I can see many that you have joined tonight, that we also join us on the 3rd of June. And on that note, I invite all of you to kind of look at our different social media channels that you can find here. So we have a website. You can email us as well, and obviously on Twitter and Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube find more information. As I mentioned at the beginning, this is the first of a series. The second one will probably take place at the end of June, and then we will have another one after the summer break, where we dive more deeply into some of the discussions, especially on the employee-employer relationship that we discussed, on management, on career paths in 2030. So I hope that you will be with us for the next webinars as well. With that, I wish you all a nice evening. Thank you very much for tuning in. Thank you very much for staying so long with us, and hope to see you all back on this channel very soon. Thank you very much, and good evening.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for all the
Bye-bye.
presenters.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank you so much.